Howdy all, Koopala here, or Coop, just with one of my first ever video tutorials. In this tutorial I'd like to show you how to do a little grid placement system to use in your games, just something to allow you to place items around in a grid pattern, just by rounding off some positions and spawning different objects. Should be pretty simple, and I'll do my best to explain it, but please forgive me if I sort of fumble my way through this a bit, doing it unscripted, and like I said, this is my first ever tutorial, so we'll just see how we go. Once done, this should sort of be your end result, the ability to just, as you can see, move items around in a grid pattern in your game world, as well as like a cool little template effect there showing you where you're going to place an item before you actually do. We'll also throw in a few little checks and conditions to sort of prevent it from going out of control. As you can see, I can't place houses where there's no grass, and I can't place grass over the top of houses, that kind of thing. So yeah, thanks for watching, have a bit of a look, and hopefully we'll get through this together in one piece. Alrighty, just before we get started on the scripts, I'll just quickly show you what we have set up in the scene already, or in the project. It's just a new project. I've made it 2D just because we'll be focusing on a 2D placement grid for this tutorial. In the scene, all I have at the moment is just the main camera, and I've created a few prefabs down here for our objects, and other than that I have the save copy of the scene and the sprites we'll be using. So these objects, I'll just drag them into the scene so you can sort of see what's going on. I've got two sort of main objects that we'll be placing in the world or using with this grid. I've got a grass tile, just a green tile, nothing fancy, just to sort of represent the ground, and I've got a little house object that we'll be placing into the world. As you'll notice, I've got two versions of each object. I've got a transparent one, so it's a little bit see-through, and I've got sort of a normal object. So as you would have seen in the demo, the transparent object is just going to be, it's like a template, so when we're moving the mouse around the world, that's what will sit on the mouse cursor and show us what we're going to place and where we're going to place it. And then once we actually click the mouse and place the object, it'll turn into the solid version, and that's the one that'll sit in the game world and be placed onto the grid. The only other thing worth mentioning about these objects, for the templates, I've set an order in layer of 1, so all the objects have a sprite render attached with the sprite added to it. For the templates, yeah, they have an order in layer of 1, just so they'll sit on top of the actual placed objects. Otherwise, when we're moving the templates around, they might get hidden behind any of the objects that are already in the world. If you've done any work in 2D, you should be pretty familiar with that process already. So I'll get rid of those, we don't need them to sit in there. Cool, we have a nice blank scene. We'll get started on writing the scripts. Alrighty, so to achieve the result we want, we're probably only going to need two scripts, I'd say. The first one I'll attach to the template objects, and what the script is going to do is control their position in the game world, so tell them to follow the mouse cursor around the world, but sticking to a grid, so it won't be smooth. It'll sort of go 1, 2, 3, 4 sort of thing. And it'll also, when we left click, it'll create a copy of its final object. So if it's a grass template, it'll create a grass tile. If it's a house template, it'll create a house tile at the position of the template object. So we'll create that now. We'll create a new folder, we'll call it scripts, and in there we'll go new C# script, which we'll call template script. Get that one open. Visual Studio, what do you think? Try that again. There we go, that's better. We won't need the start method, but we will need a couple of variables. The first one I'm going to create, we'll make it a serialized field so that it's exposed to the editor, and we'll make it a private game object called final object. This will contain the object that the template will create a copy of. So once again, if it's the grass template, for example, this object will be the grass tile. We're also going to want a, what are we going to need? A vector2, which will, we'll make it a private vector2, which we will call mouse pos. So that's just going to hold the position of the mouse and use it to update the template object's position. So we'll set those now. What we'll do, we'll say that mouse pos is equal to camera.main.screen to world point. So in other words, we're finding the main camera and we're saying get a position. We want it to be from the screen, but we want it to be in world coordinates so that we can control it, and that position will be the input.mouse position, in other words the location of the mouse. Once we've grabbed that, we will say make the transform.position of the template object equal to a new vector2, and that vector2 will be mathf.round. So we want to take the position and round it of mousepos.x, and we'll do the same for y. So mathf.round mousepos.y. So once again, the position will be equal to the rounded mouse position coordinates. So in other words, we won't end up getting any like 1 point whatevers or 2 point whatevers. It'll just be sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, or minus 1, 2, 3, etc., which will give that the cool sort of grid movement. So we should be able to give you an example of that now. We'll just set a couple of things. So for the grass template, oops, want to attach the script to them first. That would help. We now go to that one. We can see there it wants the final object, so we'll make the final object for the grass template the grass tile, and do the same for the house tile. Sweet. So if I was to now drag one of those on there, we'll just drag the grass template on, run the game. Hopefully it should just follow the mouse around, and as you can see it's sticking to that grid. Cool. Easy peas. Get rid of that. Now we'll go back into this and we'll just add one more thing so that it actually creates a copy of the final object. We'll say if input.get mouse button down 0, that being left click. If so, in other words, if we press the left mouse button down, we will instantiate a copy of the final object at our transform.position with its quaternion.identity as its rotation. So in other words, we're creating the final object at the template object's position using the rotation of the object that we're creating. Excellent. So I'll just finish that one up. There we go. So just go back in here and I'll just show you that one again. So we'll chuck in the house template, run it, and we can chuck down copies of it. Awesome. Now there's a bit of a problem with this one. If I was to click again over one of the existing objects, and if you were to watch the hierarchy here, you'll see that it allows me to continue creating multiple copies, all just sort of stacked on that one position. We don't really want that to happen, so the way to get around that is to use a raycast to sort of check if there's anything under the object already, and then spawn accordingly. So I'll get rid of that. Now we need a couple of things with this. I've already got some layers and stuff created, but I'm going to add in some additional things. Now I might just change these a little bit. We'll just say grass tile. So I'm adding layers here. Grass tile layer. I'm going to add another one there. We'll call it house tile layer, and we'll do the same for tags. So we'll say grass tile, and add another tag which we'll call house tile. Awesome. And we'll just assign the two tile objects to those. This one's already on there. Excellent. Grass tile layer, and we'll do the same for the house tile layer. Sweet. So now we should be able to start working with that raycast. We'll do it in the if input.get mouse button down, because we'll probably only want to do this when we click the left mouse button. We don't need to be casting unnecessary raycasts. It's just a bit wasteful, so we'll only do it when we click. So what we'll do, when we click that left mouse button, we're going to say create a new vector2, a temporary one, which we'll call mouse ray. This is going to the position that the raycast is casted at, and we'll once again camera.main.screen to world point, This time we're going to use the transform.position of the template object instead, because that's already being rounded up here. It will just ensure that our locations are consistent. Once we've got that position, we're going to cast the raycast by creating a new raycast hit 2D, which we'll call rayHit, and that will be equal to a physics2d.raycast, which will be at an origin of, oops, no, not transform.position, it'll be at mouse ray. I suppose really you could do it either way, it doesn't matter. The direction will be vector2.0, because we want it to be casted from the camera towards the game world. We'll give it a distance of mathf.infinity, and what we can do here now, we can, oh, I need to actually add that layer mask, that would help. I'll do that now. So we'll create a layer, say serialized field. Just once again, we'll want to edit this in the editor. Private layer mask. Just wondering how best to do this. I might just start, oh, I know what I'll do, I'll call it all tiles for now, all tiles layer, and we're just going to chuck everything in that, you'll see, and we'll use it here, all tiles layer. So in other words, that's going to cast a raycast, and once we assign layers to the layer mask, it should ideally hit anything that's below it. So this is where we can start breaking things up. So we'll keep it simple for now. What I'll say is if rayHit, there it is, dot collider equals null. So in other words, if we don't hit anything, then we'll chuck in that instantiate, which I had still on the clipboard. So in other words, when we click the left mouse button, we're going to grab the current position. You know what, we probably don't even need that. Nah, we'll leave it actually, I think we do. Because that's the rounded position using screen to world point. So we grab that position, we cast a raycast towards, or from the camera towards the game world, which will hit any of the tiles that are currently in the world, and if it hits one of them, we'll, or in other words, if it doesn't hit one of them, so if it returns null, in other words, if it doesn't hit anything, then we'll create the object. So we'll just save that, go back into Unity. Hopefully I should be able to demonstrate that one. Actually, a couple of things we need to do first. To the grass tile and the house tile, we're going to want to add physics2d box collider. Yes! If we don't add the colliders, the raycasts won't hit them. There'll be nothing for them to hit. So that's kind of important. Make sure you add the colliders. I always forget. Cool. So I'm going to add in, we'll use the grass template this time, because why not? And we'll run it. With a bit of luck, if I've done this right, and we click once and click again, for some reason it keeps going. I know why. I haven't assigned the layer mask. We'll do that now. So the all tiles layer. So once again, back on the template objects, the all tiles layer, we want to contain the grass tile layer and the house tile layer. So the problem I was just having there was, without adding these, I basically wasn't checking for any layers. So if we do that again, hopefully it should work this time. Click, 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 click. No extra copies, we've only got the one. If I click next to it, we get an additional one. Click, click, click. But if I click anywhere on these, you'll see we're not creating any additional objects. So it's working as it should. Cool. Now, some of you might have noticed a bit of a problem with that. And that is, if I was to place a grass object, which we ideally want to be the ground, and then place a house object, it won't go over the top of it. So in other words, both tiles need nothing to be there in order to spawn. We can fix that. Now, probably the best way we can do that, because I think we've already assigned... Yeah, I'll just be a bit cheeky. I know how we can do this. So, if it doesn't hit anything, probably want to change that. So let's just change this around a little bit. So, Actually, I'll leave that back in there. So, hey, collider.gameObject.tag. So in other words, we're going to find the tag of the object that we've hit. If it is equal to, let's say, grass tile. So in other words, if we hit one of the grass tiles, and if this .gameObject.tag, so in other words, if the template object, we haven't assigned that a tag yet, but we will, is grass, is is house template, then we will allow it to spawn a copy of the house object on top of the grass object. We'll assign those tags in a second. Else if collider dot rayhit dot collider equals null. So in other words, if we don't hit anything, and if this dot gameObject.tag is equal to grass template. So in other words, if we're the grass template object, and if we don't hit anything, then we will allow it to spawn the grass tile. That should take care of it, I think. We'll see. I'll go back in here, and to the template objects, we're just going to have to add a couple new tags. Say add tag, add two more. First one will be grass template, and the second one will be house template. Those are the two that we defined in the script. Cool, that should take care of it. Now, that's all a bit pointless, really, because we can't actually currently swap between the two items, so that'll be in the next script. The important thing is that we're actually casting that raycast and checking for objects accordingly, and we're only doing it when we click that left mouse button. That and the template objects actually follow the mouse cursor as well, which is sort of, pretty much 50% of the way there. So the next things we're going to code is just the input to allow us to, create the template object in the first place, and to swap between the templates, so we can swap between placing the grass and the house, which we will do now. Alright, just before we begin, I realized I'd goobed a couple of things up, so we'll just fix those in the template script here. First of those is I accidentally assigned the wrong variable here, so I put mouse pos. That should actually be mouse ray. The difference really is probably not much. I'd imagine the colliders would probably be about the same size. If I was to drop that one on top, it's probably, yeah, so the colliders are about the same, so it probably wouldn't make a huge difference, but if you were to expand on this script and add different sized objects, anything a little bit smaller or bigger, you could end up accidentally overlapping your objects. If you miss that collider, because the collider wouldn't be taking up the 1x1 unit squared, you could accidentally overlap those objects on top of each other. So we'll just fix that one. If that didn't make sense, I apologize. Just trust me on that one. We'll make it mouse ray so that it's actually using the correct transform dot position, so the rounded position, rather than just the pure mouse position up there. The other thing as well, in this if check here, I realized we could have some problems. So if we actually click somewhere, if a collision doesn't occur from that raycast, there won't be a game object.tag there. So it will, because it comes back null, the first check that it's going to do is if the game object.tag attached to the collider. If there isn't a collider, if there's no collision, there won't be a game object.tag, so it'll probably just throw a null reference exception. So probably one way around that would be, we'll take that out and we'll just say if rayhit dot collider does not equal null, and then inside that we'll say if blah. So what that's essentially just doing is saying, okay, if we don't hit anything, then run this check. If this check ends up being false, it won't matter. It shouldn't also conflict with this. So basically, if we don't hit something, check again and see if it matches this criteria. If we do hit something and it matches this criteria, then do this. So it should, because of the way we've tagged the objects, ensure that we have the correct objects spawning on top of the correct objects. There's probably a couple of other things we want to do quickly as well. So I'll just talk again about the order in layer. We've got the grass tile and the house tile on the same. So if we spawn a house tile on top of a grass tile, we could have problems with that. The house tile could end up behind the grass tile. It probably wouldn't. I think it's generally whatever spawns afterwards, whatever gets instantiated sort of second, would end up on top of it anyway. But just to be safe, it's probably best so we change those. So we'll make the the template objects number 3. Because to the best of my understanding, the higher the number, the closer to the camera that object will appear. We'll leave the grass tile on 0, and we'll make the house tile 1. Actually, they don't need to be 3. We'll make them 2. The template objects can be 2. Doesn't matter, but I just like to be neat and tidy. Awesome. Cool. So that should be all we need in there. I'm pretty sure that's going to work, but we won't really know until we get the object swapping in there. It's a bit hard to test in the meantime. So just do a quick save all. Everything's good there. And we'll move on to the next script. Alright, cool. Let's do the placement script now. So this will be a script that just gets a bit of input from the user and allows them to do things like scrolling between the items and clearing the selection if they have one, that sort of thing. Should be pretty easy. What we'll do, we'll create an empty game object in the scene. We're going to call it placement manager because it's the object that will manage placement. Yeah, sure, why not? And in scripts, we're going to create a new C# script, and we'll call this one placement script. I'll just have a quick look, make sure everything else is okay with the objects before we get started. Oh, hello. This would be helpful. We want to tag the grass template, and I'm going to guess, yep, I haven't tagged the house template either, so let's make sure we assign those to tags, otherwise it won't work. Cool, so we have the placement script. Let's get that one open. Let Visual Studio do its thing. We'll be using both the start and the update functions this time. And we'll create a couple of variables. So first up, what we're going to do, we'll create a private int. This is going to act as a counter for the object that we have selected, so it'll allow us to scroll between the objects that we want to place. So we'll call it selected object in array. Cool. We'll also create a private game object, which we will call currently selected object. This is going to, basically this variable will store a reference to the template object that we have on screen. So if we want to then say delete it or change it to something else, we're going to need a reference to it so the game knows which object we're referring to. You'll see what I mean in a little bit. We're also going to create an array now. We'll want to access this in the editor, so we'll do serialize field to expose it, and we'll do private game object. And to make that an array, we'll just chuck some square brackets on the end of it, and we'll call this one selectable objects. Cool, we'll just save that. We'll also want a private bool, and we'll call it is an object selected. And just as a force of habit, I'll set that to false. I think if you weren't to declare it there, it'll just set it to false by default, but whatever. Cool. Now, just before we go any further, let's go in here. I'm going to drag the placement script onto the manager. If we go to the manager, cool, there's the array. Set that to 2 because we have 2 objects. And we're going to drag the templates in, so not the actual objects themselves, we want to do the templates. So the grass as item 0 and house as element 1. Element 0, element 1. Sounds a bit better. Yeah, more professional. Cool, so that's done. We've got those objects in there. Alright, what's next? So in start, let's just say selected object in array, so the int is equal to 0. So when the game starts, the object that we'll have selected first will be element 0, which is the grass template. In update, we're going to set a key for the user to bring up that object. So if input.getKey down is E key, why not? And is an object selected is equal to false. So in other words, if the user doesn't have an object selected already and they press the E key, then what we'll do first, we'll just create a couple of vector 2s. So vector 2 mouse pos. So we're going to do similar to what we did last time. Mouse pos equals camera dot main dot screen to world point input dot mouse position. And we'll do the rounding again, also with a new temporary vector 2. What will we call this one? Spawn pos. What does that equal? That equals a new vector 2 mathf.round mousepos.x, and again for y mathf.round mousepos.y. So we're just doing the same thing as last time, just getting the mouse position and then rounding it off to make sure it all sticks to the grid. Cool. Cool, so now the user presses the E key, doesn't have an object selected already. What we're going to do, we will, I think that's all we need to do. Cool. We are going to say the currently selected object is equal to game object instantiate. And what this is doing here, so it's a little bit different than normal. What we're doing is spawning a game object, or instantiating a game object. So we're telling it this is what we're about to instantiate. We're instantiating it, but we're also storing a reference to it, and that reference is the currently selected object variable. It'll make sense in a little bit. So we're instantiating. What are we instantiating? We are instantiating from the selectable objects array. We're going to instantiate element number selected object in array. So we're using that int to tell it which item or which element from the array to instantiate. We're going to instantiate it at spawn pos, and once again we'll use quaternion.identity as the rotations don't change. What we're also going to do is an object selected is going to now equal true to say that we've got one out. Awesome, let's give that a quick test just to make sure it's working and I haven't forgotten anything, which is very likely. Play. If we press E, we get the green the grass template up. If we click, cool. That's all well and good. Excellent, that's what we wanted to happen. Awesome, so now what we'll want to do, let's say we want to clear that selection, we don't want to be clicking and placing objects anymore. The next thing we'll do is say if input.getMouseButton, we'll say 1, no, actually we want getMouseButton down 1, and is an object selected is equal to true. So in other words, if we have an object selected and we press the right mouse button, what we're going to do, we will say destroy the currently selected object. So we'll delete the template. We'll set is an object selected back to false. And what we might also do is set the selected object in array int back to 0, so it just resets it. So that'll make a bit more sense in a sec too. That should work now. Let's give that one a quick test too. Always good to make sure you're testing things as you go. Otherwise, if you make a bunch of changes, test it, and something doesn't work, it can be fun to try and find out where you went wrong. So there we go. Press E. Yep, up it comes. I don't want to click this anymore. I don't want to place things. Right click. Bam. Away it goes. And if we press E again, cool. It's coming up again. So it's still working. All right. Let's go back to the script. Awesome. What should we do next? Let's do the scrolling between. So we're going to use the mouse wheel now. So let's say if input.getAxis, because we're going to get the mouse wheel, mouse scroll wheel. So this is an axis that's defined in the project's input settings, I believe. And that's the name of it, mouse scroll wheel. Now what we do with an axis is it's either going to be greater than or less than a value. In this case, the mouse scroll wheel, if going up, should be greater than 0. And we might also, and is an object selected equals true. So we'll only be able to cycle between objects if we've got one selected. So if an object is selected and we scroll up on the mouse wheel, what we want to do is we want to take the selected object in array int, and we want to increment it by 1, which is the plus. We'd want to do a quick check too. So if we were to keep incrementing this array, we'd eventually get larger, incrementing the int, we would eventually get larger than the amount of objects or amount of elements in the array. So we want to prevent that. So we'll say if selected object in array is greater than selectable objects dot length minus 1. Now if you haven't used arrays much, that might be a bit confusing, but the reason we're doing -1 there is because the length of an array will always be 1 greater than the element selected, at least in this context. So the elements start from 0, so the very first object in an array or element will be element 0, but when talking about length, the length will start from 1. So if we weren't to include that, and we got to the length would be 1 greater than the last element, and we'd get a null reference error. If you don't believe me, give it a go and see what happens. So if it gets to greater than the length -1, what we want to do is say selected object in array, so that int again is going to be equal to 0. So basically it just loops back around to the start. So once we hit the end, it'll just go back to 0. We're also going to say destroy the currently selected object, so similar to what we were doing above, and then we can probably even just copy and paste this bit. So after we destroy it, we are then going to spawn the new object. So once again it'll be getting that reference, so the int will increment. If it reaches the end, it'll loop back around, but either way it should be different than what it was when we scrolled up to begin with. So the int will increment, it'll destroy the template that's currently out, and then it's going to spawn the object again, but this time with the new int instead. So it should, scroll through pretty nicely. I think that's all we need to do for there. So we'll do an else if. And what we can probably do here is just copy the whole lot, I reckon, and we'll just make a few changes. We'll get rid of that. So else if paste. So this time, if it is less than 0 and we have an object selected, we are going to -1 from that int instead. So minus instead of plus. We'll make a couple of changes to this. So once again the check, this time if the selected object in array is less than 0, so in other words we're scrolling down, we've got to 0, we've scrolled 1 past 0, what we want to do is tell it to now go back to the end of the array. So selected object in array is going to be equal to selectable objects dot length -1, once again doing that little -1 there to make sure it doesn't end up on an element that doesn't exist, and then repeat the same process. That should hopefully be all that's involved with that. Let's give it a test and make sure it actually works. Just play when it comes up. So if we press E, we get the first element in the array. If we scroll the mouse wheel up, we get the next one. Just clear that. If we clear it, it should reset back to the grass tile, which it did, and we'll scroll in the other direction, which with 2 items selected probably isn't noticeable, but you get the idea. And there it goes. Cool, so now we can probably try and place some stuff. Let's see if this works. Let's place some grass down. And oh, hello. That's not working. Why not? Let's find out. Pause that. Let's go back in. Alright, now all the objects should be tagged. They are. They're all on the correct layers. Okay. Now I don't think it's this. This doesn't control the spawning of objects, the placement script, so it's got to be in the template script somewhere. Let's have a bit of a look. Now we know all that works. We know that spawning of these objects works. You know what? I reckon it's this. I reckon I've stuffed this up. Actually, I think I have. My apologies, guys. I done goobed again. So I'm going to get rid of this, the Vector 2 mouse ray. Let's just not use that. I reckon that's where I'm stuffing it up. And instead of telling it to spawn at that, which I think is probably throwing that Vector 2 around a little bit, it's probably not accurate, I'm just going to say spawn, do the mouse ray at transform.position. Should achieve the same thing. Cool. Alright, let's give that a whirl. So once again, save it, play. Click, 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 click. Grass, 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 yay. Oh, look at that fancy square looking awesome yum. And let's place a house. Oh, good stuff. Look at that. It's like a regular little Sim City up in here. And so you can see as well there that the order and layer stuff is working. So the templates are appearing over everything else. They sort of don't appear over their own objects. Or they do, but you just can't see it because of the object behind the transparent object. A way to get around that is you could probably alter the color of the transparent sprite just so it appears, like make it a reddish tinge or something, whatever. If you wanted to be really tricky, you could even, if it's not placeable on a particular spot, you could turn it red, and if it is placeable, turn it blue, whatever. There you go, some homework for you. But you can see that the order and layer is working. So the grass is the very back layer, the house is the next one, and then the templates are appearing over the top of all of those. Otherwise, seems to be working. That's the basic method for that. So I guess it's not the only way, but it's probably one way that you can achieve this result, so that you can have like a little grid placement system going. You can obviously expand on that a lot. If you wanted to add to it, you could. All I'm really hoping to do here is just show you a very basic way of achieving it. It can probably be made a bit more efficient too, but yeah, just for simplicity's sake and to give you guys a good example, I just kept it rather simple. But yeah, feel free having to play around with that one. If you come up with any good little ideas or you come up with something cool with it, I'd love to see what you come up with. Feel free to drop us a line or leave a comment and let us know what you come up with. Otherwise, guys, thanks for watching. Appreciate it. And yeah, like I said, any feedback, let me know. See ya.